I'd like to thank the CSBA for inviting me to be a speaker. This is my first talk at a state meeting, and feels great because I'm used to learning a lot of good information here, and hopefully everyone takes one little thing away from this presentation. So what we're seeing in this video is the insemination technician's immediate goal. We're seeing that the queen is receiving care from her retinue, so that tells us that we've set up the nuke properly. It was queenless to begin with, so they're not rejecting her. She's laying regularly, and she has no damaged legs or tarsi, and that's really important because she uses her feet or tarsi to cling onto the comb. They play a role in transferring pheromone throughout the hive, and she also determines if she's going to lay a fertilized or unfertilized egg in the cell based on the diameter of the cell, which she gauges with her feet. Also important to note is that she's got a plastic numbered tag on, and in case that falls off, you can see the worker on her right now is pretty diligently cleaning it. So in case it falls off, we know that she's still that original queen because her wing is clipped. So that's important for me to do when I'm contracting for beekeepers, because I don't always get to see these queens again, and if I introduce them, it's not necessarily to say that they'll be there in 6 months, so I want to know, based on a clipped wing, say that it was still that queen that I inseminated 6 months ago. Everything I'll talk about today is based on experiences working from or for Sue Kobe at UC Davis, or for California queen breeders and training sessions with a few Aussie queen breeders. Okay, so what are our common problems? There are a lot of them. So these are in order of the procedure, I guess. So first thing is drone maturity. If you don't have mature drones, there's no reason for the insemination exercise. Queen damage, so if she's damaged during banking, maybe you have high numbers of queens and not enough bees in there taking care of her, or there's not adequate food, then the workers might become a little bit aggressive towards those banked virgins. And one common damage is to the tarsi, so if the workers are unhappy with those virgins in the bank, they might chew on their little tarsal pads that help them to cling to the comb and transfer pheromone. So if you have a damaged queen, there's no reason to inseminate her because she'll be at risk of supersedure earlier than she would if she wasn't damaged. We need to pay attention to hygiene during semen collection so that there's no risk of the queens becoming infected when you inseminate them. And if you have unclean conditions, you could have high mortality in that tube of semen that you're collecting. Nucleus colony setup and location. That's important in terms of any pests. If you have a high density of pests, say a small hive beetle, or with nucleus colony setup, you just want to set that colony up for success. So when that queen gets in there, that colony is ready to accept her and give her as much care as you can. So, and then existing management practices I'll touch on through each of these categories. So first one, drone maturity. It takes 40 days from the time the queen lays an egg, unfertilized egg, to the time that drone will be mature. So that's the first thing you got to think about when you're hiring an insemination technician, or you want to receive training, or you're doing it yourself. So you get your calendar out and you think, well, probably I want to inseminate queens mid-March. So you got to backtrack 40 days, make sure you have to identify your drone mother colonies based on the traits that you want to increase in your operation or maintain in your operation. And you can stimulate those colonies if there's not a nectar flow on. You can supplement sugar feed or add pollen supplement as well. And so I have this chart on my desk all the time because sometimes it's hard for me to keep numbers in my head. So I think, okay, yeah, 40 days to maturity. That means I'm going to graft when that drone is around 21 days old. And so that makes the timing come together for virgins being sexually mature and drones being sexually mature at the same time, around 40 days old for a drone. I can send this chart to anyone. It's from a German insemination guide based off of that. Next one, queen loss or damage. So this is an example of an existing management practice. I was contracted to do insemination training at the National Agricultural University in Hanoi, and they had a few issues with the queen rearing process, and partially it was due to what materials were available to them. So the queen cell cups they were using, you can see the base of the cups are different sizes, and then the cage itself they were making out of a thick wire, wrapping it around a dowel, so it's kind of like a little spring that encases the queen cell. And as you might imagine, they were not uniform. So in our bank of 45 virgins, there may be 5 or 6 running around in there. So it's not really great for virgin health and happiness. So, so we just had to make our cages more uniform, put a little piece of wood that was bigger than the existing base of that cell cup, so we prevent virgins from running around and terrorizing the caged virgins with their pheromones. California queen breeders are experts at queen banking, so this is the cage I found to be the best. This little, is it called a bullet cage? I forget what this little one's called. But anyways, the wire mesh that's on the front of it is really nice for ease of feeding. The nurse bees feed the queens through there really well, as opposed to the hair roller cages, which you can use, but when we used those at UC Davis, Sue found that the bees were more prone to covering up some of those holes with wax. I don't think they were feeding the queens as good, but you can use them. One beekeeper I provided training to was emerging the cells in these because they do have a nice little add-on piece that accommodates the cell and protects the cell if you're worried about that. However, it just seems like they don't get as good a care in that kind of a cage. So what we did with this beekeeper that only had these cages, we would put in 4 nurse bees when we put the cells in the banking colony. So the day before the queen's emerging, we put 4 nurse bees in there, and then they'll immediately take care of her and ask for more food. So she's got a better chance of getting fed. And then another big queen damage risk is during insemination itself. If you're a new operator, there's a lot of moving parts, especially to the Schley instrument. So we've got our ventral hook, which moves on a rotating axis, so you can poke and prod that queen at all sides. So that's a risk. And we've got our sting forceps, which take a gentle touch because the sting, you have to grab that small filament and parse off these fleshy segments from the sting that aid in oviposition. So they aid in egg laying. So if you damage those, workers might get some cue from her that maybe she's damaged in some way. Also the queen holder, it's just this little tube that's tapered so that she can't back out of it, which if you have queens that maybe didn't get the greatest nutrition they could while you were raising them, they might be a little bit skinny. So they might back out of that quite easily. She's getting a dose of CO2 in here, so that tells you if she's really working hard to get out of there, probably you need to check your carbon dioxide line, which anesthetizes her during the process. And then the last moving part is the syringe itself. It's on a flexible connection here, a piece of silicone tubing. So that's actually the least worry you have during the process. But once you get a lot of practice, there's really minimal damage that can happen at this point, unless someone like bumps into your table while you're doing this. Okay, and then the last stage is when you introduce the queen. This is a pushing cage on a frame of brood. If the nuke isn't set up properly, then she could die in that cage, even though she's away from the majority of the workers. If they totally ignore her because there's a recently mated queen in there, she could die at that stage too. So, talk about hygiene during collection and insemination. So we want to sterilize all equipment with alcohol, 95% alcohol first, and then flush that with distilled water. You can also heat sterilize all glass pieces, but I mean, I never get them that dirty, so I just use the alcohol and distilled water. And it's important to remember that when you're cleaning the syringe tip, not to reuse tissues. In this day and age of recycle, reduce, reuse, it seems like a waste to use a tissue for this tiny little cleanup job and then throw it away, but that's what you have to do. You have to have a different mindset on and think, okay, even if I'm wearing gloves, the first thing I touch after I put that glove on, now the glove is contaminated. So it can protect you from drone feces, say, which are really acidic, but you have to keep in your mind that you're not going to touch any surface that's going to come in contact with the semen or the queen during insemination with some contaminated equipment, such as your hands. And then the next troubleshooting thing is replace perished rubber accessories. So if I provide training for someone that's purchased a used instrument, first thing I would do is test it with water and make sure that it has a successful vacuum, because you need that in your syringe to take up liquid and push liquid out. So sometimes if someone's bought a used piece of equipment, there might be little rubber connectors that have perished over time and need to be replaced. And this tubing is just in my setup with this Harvo syringe. The syringe tip is towards the queen. This is just a micrometer, so it measures very small amounts of liquid. It measures 200 microliters. And I've got my tubing all bagged here, so if there's any drone feces spraying, it's not getting to that, but I would sterilize those before use anyway. So these are one-time use items. And when I want to take care of the syringe tip and make sure that the liquid can free flow through that, there's no drying of any liquid, I'll get some sterile saline solution and I'll apply it with a 1 cc syringe that after that day's lab use, that'll get thrown away, recycled. Okay, appropriate antibiotic use. It's important to use an antibiotic in your saline solution. This is a recommended simple saline solution in Kobe, Tarpey, and Loika's standard methods for instrumental insemination. I consult this document all the time. It's got every single step to the insemination process, from saline mixing to drone aversion, and it's got all the good stuff. So if you're looking to learn the skill, I'd read this and probably pick up Sue Kobe's insemination video. So for me, from the standpoint of my small business, this was a minor hurdle to overcome, because I'm not with my business, I'm not affiliated with the university at the moment, so I just had to look through different scientific supply companies and prove that I wasn't going to use this for human organ transplant. So I had to sign a document that said I wasn't going to do in vitro fertilization for humans and no organ transplants. So sorry, everybody. And let's see. The ease of acquiring antibiotics is different depending on what country you're in. So for example, this broad spectrum antibiotic cost me $75 in the US. However, this broad spectrum antibiotic in Vietnam cost 1 US penny. But there's a difference in cost of living and all that. So for me, for my purposes, actually I cut out all ingredients but the broad spectrum antibiotic, our sodium, and our distilled water. So I've just got a pre-made saline solution and antibiotic, and I'm collecting semen and inseminating the same day. I'm not storing with this saline solution. And to put that in context, I know Australian beekeepers who regularly use contact lens solution, saline solution, with no antibiotic. So that's why I feel comfortable using this more basic one. And this is, again, that paper, Standard Methods of Instrumental Insemination, which is a really good resource. Okay. And next thing to think about is nucleus location. Before you go through all the efforts of sourcing your support colonies that you're going to pull brood and bees from. So this location looks pretty idyllic in comparison to this one. Ideally, you'll have a location that's close to your lab, because then you can have a runner. Once you've inseminated that queen, your runner can take her to the nucleus colonies you've set up 24 hours ahead of time and introduce her in a pushing cage. So it's really close, you don't have to drive there. However, if your only option next to your lab, usually in your home, is a gravel pad, that's probably not the best. As you can see from my shocking lack of personal protective equipment, it was really hot. If I didn't get sunburned so easily, I would have been wearing shorts and a short sleeve. But this location was really hard on queens because it was just so hot during the day, and they had really small entrances in these nukes that were available to us. So they just didn't really get started laying great guns as they would have, say, in cooler locations such as this one. This is 2 locations from the same beekeeper in southeastern Queensland. And another problem with this location in particular is that it's got nice ground cover, it's really moist out there, and with high humidity, you can run into a small hive beetle slime out situation. Eric, there's a video here which is pretty gross, so if anybody's squeamish, close your eyes.
All right.
So if you don't stock a nuke with enough bees in southeastern Queensland, this is what happens. So small hive beetles, they sense that there's a weak colony, and they'll zero in on that colony, and they'll just foul up all the frames. So that colony's a loss. If you were using that for a natural mate, that's a scrap. Yeah, that's a total loss. So you pull out all the frames, they're all fouled up, and you just burn them, because at this stage, I mean, you can see half the frames are there. So you have to think of your pest concentration in your area. If you're in southeastern states or Hawaii, this might be an issue to you. In California, at the moment, it's not an issue. Okay, so once you've gotten to this stage of insemination, the final really important task is preparing your nucleus colony with adequate bees and food. So before insemination, we set up those nucleus colonies. So we think, okay, I'm inseminated Tuesday afternoon, so I want those nukes set up by Monday afternoon. So you're preparing them 24 hours in advance, so they're queenless for 24 hours, they're ready for that new queen. And we'll introduce her using the pushing cage method, and we'll keep her in that cage for 3 days. So this method is used by Sukobe and BP queen bees regularly, and was used by the Glens when they were in operation. So BP queen bees uses this method. They took over Varroa-sensitive Hygiene stock production from the Glens when they retired. So they stock each nucleus colony with 4 frames, a heavy honey frame, 3 frames of sealed brood, and enough bees to regulate colony temperature if there's a cool night or a hot day. And we don't use any frames of, ideally we won't use any frames of unsealed brood, because that's just more labor and more disturbance that we have to make that colony endure, looking for queen cells that might ruin our inseminated queen's chance of successful laying. So this is an example of a nucleus colony I would introduce a queen into. This was a time of year that was generally warm days, warm nights, so I wasn't worried about this location getting out of the cluster overnight. But if you're in early spring doing this, you probably should put the cage right about here so that during the evening, overnight, that queen's always going to be in the cluster of bees if it gets tighter over a cooler night. And we've oriented it away from the entrance, so away from any drafts. We've got our heavy honey frame here, and all the rest of the frames have sealed brood and some food around the top edges. And this beautiful brood was stolen from Sarah Red Lair's colonies in Ashland, Oregon, which looked great. And this is a good reference for quantity of bees. So this amount of bees should be on every single frame on every side. So it's not busting. It's not going to swarm on us, but it's not. The cluster is not going to be really small overnight either. This is an example of push-in cage construction. Sorry, it's in millimeters. And the diagram's not totally to scale, but basically just once it's folded and all, you want it kind of like that. Not too. So she's got some room in there, and there's, is it? Bill, is my time totally up?
It is.
Okay. Dun, 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 dun. That was all about pushing cages. Here's another option. If you don't want to do inseminated queens, you could find an island. Or a prairie waste field in WSU for their quarantine queens. Oh, that was going to be cool. Oh well. Okay, thanks everybody.